Once upon a time, there was a small country in what is now southern Nepal that was ruled by a clan called the Shakyas. The head of this clan and the king of this country was named Shuddhodana Gautama, and his wife was the beautiful Mahamaya. Mahamaya was expecting her firstborn. As was the custom of the day, when the time came near for Queen Mahamaya to have her child, she traveled to her father's kingdom for the birth. But during the long journey, her birth pains began. They say the birth was nearly painless, even though the child had to be delivered from her side. After, a gentle rain fell on the mother and the child to cleanse them. It is said that the child was born fully awake. He could speak and told his mother he had come to free all mankind from suffering. They named him Siddhartha, which means he who has attained his goals. King Shuddhodana consulted Asita, a well-known soothsayer, concerning the future of his son. Asita proclaimed that he would be one of two things. He could become a great king, even an emperor, or he could become a great sage and savior of humanity. The king, eager that his son should become a king like himself, was determined to shield the child from anything that might result in him taking up the religious life. And so Siddhartha was kept in one or another of their three palaces, and was prevented from experiencing much of what ordinary folk might consider quite commonplace. He was not permitted to see the elderly, the sickly, the dead, or anyone who had dedicated themselves to spiritual practices. He won the hand of a beautiful princess of a neighboring kingdom. Yasodhara was her name, and they married when both were 16 years old. As Siddhartha continued living in the luxury of his palaces, he grew increasingly restless and curious about the world beyond the palace walls. He finally demanded that he be permitted to see his people and his lands. The king carefully arranged that Siddhartha should still not see the kind of suffering that he feared would lead him to a religious life, and decreed that only young and healthy people should greet the prince. As he was led through Kapilavatthu, the capital, he chanced to see a couple of old men who had accidentally wandered near the parade route. Then he came across some people who were severely ill, and finally he came across a funeral ceremony by the side of a river, and for the first time in his life saw death. At the age of 29, Siddhartha came to realize that he could not be happy living as he had been. He had discovered suffering and wanted more than anything to discover how one might overcome suffering. After kissing his sleeping wife and newborn son Rahula goodbye, he snuck out of the palace, cut his long hair, and studied for a while with two famous gurus of the day, but found their practices lacking. He then began to practice the austerities and self-mortifications practiced by a group of 5 ascetics. The sincerity and intensity of his practice were so astounding that before long the 5 ascetics became followers of Siddhartha. But the answers to his questions were not forthcoming. He redoubled his efforts, refusing food and water until he was in a state of near death. Siddhartha then realized that these extreme practices were leading him nowhere, that in fact it might be better to find some middle way between the extremes of the life of luxury and the life of self-mortification. So he ate and drank and bathed in the river. In the town of Bodh Gaya, Siddhartha decided that he would sit under a certain fig tree as long as it would take for the answers to the problem of suffering to come. He sat there for many days, first in deep concentration to clear his mind of all distractions, then in mindfulness meditation opening himself up to the truth. He began, they say, to recall all his previous lives and to see everything that was going on in the entire universe. Siddhartha finally understood the answer to the question of suffering and became the Buddha, which means he who is awake. It is said that Mara, the evil one, tried to prevent this great occurrence. Siddhartha, having conquered all temptations, touched the ground with one hand and asked the earth to be his witness. Siddhartha, now the Buddha, remained seated under the tree for many days longer. It seemed to him that this knowledge he had gained was far too difficult to communicate to others. Legend has it that Brahma, king of the gods, convinced Buddha to teach, saying that some of us, perhaps, have only a little dirt in our eyes, and could awake if we only heard his story.
Rituals of the Buddhist religion include going for refuge, making offerings and practicing, precept ceremonies, and rites of passage. Going for refuge is the first and only mandatory vow, and taking refuge is not wanting to harm other beings of this earth. Making offerings and practicing literally means giving liberty. It is the practice of being open-hearted and generous. Precept ceremonies. It is the first step into becoming Buddhist. Very similar to the ritual of refuge, the ceremony begins with accepting and loving yourself, including the bad and good. If you're trusting of yourself through confidence, then you can focus on practicing the Buddhist religion. Rites of passage. There is not a requirement for there to be a ceremony. However, it is usually held in the temple. In the temple, the one who is taking the rite of passage has to recite the 3 refuges, the 5 precepts with a judgment to see if the resuscitation was genuine.
Buddhism consists of 3 key elements: to lead a moral life, to be mindful and aware of thoughts and actions, and to develop wisdom and understanding. When Buddhists look towards Buddha, they do not do it for worship or in a way to ask for favors, but as more of a role model. Bowing to the statue is an expression of gratitude for the teachings he provides. Buddhism teaches us that wealth does not result in happiness, and anyone, rich or poor, can reach true happiness through the Buddha's teaching. Buddhism's moral code involves not taking the life of anything living, to abstain from sexual misconduct and overindulgence, to refrain from untrue speech, and to avoid intoxication or losing mindfulness. Part of the Buddha's teachings involve the 4 noble truths. The first noble truth is that suffering, including pain, disease, embarrassment, disappointment, and death. Buddhism teaches how we can avoid suffering. The second noble truth is that suffering is caused by craving and aversion. Basically, getting what you want does not result in happiness. The third noble truth is that suffering can be overcome. Lastly, the fourth noble truth is that the Noble Eightfold Path is the way to end suffering. It involves being moral and aware of the impact we can have.
In Buddhism, they have blessings instead of sacraments. Buddhism is centered upon the life and teachings of Buddha, whereas Christianity is centered on the life and teachings of Jesus Christ. Buddhism is a non-theistic religion, meaning it does not believe in a supreme creator or God. Buddhism is an offshoot of Hinduism and is a dharmic religion. Christianity is an offshoot of Judaism and is an Abrahamic religion. Some places of worship for Buddhists are the Buddhist monasteries, temples, and shrines. For Catholics, they are churches, chapels, cathedrals, basilicas, and personal dwellings, such as your own home. For Buddhists, they practice meditation, the Eightfold Path. For Catholics, they practice prayer, worship in the church, reading the Bible, and acts of charity.
Buddhism started in India. However, 2 times it almost disappeared. Hindus wanted to raise the Buddha to the level of becoming a god so that Buddhism could be worshipped as if it too were a religion. Having Hinduism so many gods, eventually the Buddha would be and was forgotten. Buddhism had, however, spread to other parts of the world before it almost disappeared from India 100 years after the Buddha died. When it later came back, the Buddhist community split into 2 branches, each of which spread throughout India and split into numerous subsects. After peaking in ancient India, the practice of Buddhism and Buddhist monasteries received laity and royal support through the 12th century. Except for Himalayan region and South India, Buddhism almost became extinct in India for a second time after the arrival of Islam in the late 12th century. Buddhism remains the primary or major religion in the Himalayan, and it has been re-emerging in India since the past century, due to its adoption by many Indian intellectuals, the migration of Buddhist Tibetan exiles, and the mass conversion of hundreds of thousands of Hindu Dalits. Buddhism is practiced by an estimated 488 million people in the world as of 2010, representing 9% to 10% of the world's total population.
The eight-spoke Dharma wheel is used to symbolize the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path is a guideline for practicing Buddhists on how to live their everyday lives. The practices include right view and right understanding, clear perspective of reality, right intention, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. The lion is associated with strength and power. The lion represents Buddha as a royal prince. Buddha's teachings were sometimes referred to as the lion's roar due to its powerful messages. Footprints symbolize the physical presence of the enlightened one. Prior to Buddha's death, he left his footprints in stone as a reminder of his presence on earth. Dharma. It refers to the second jewel of the three jewels of Buddhism: Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Nirvana. The ancient definition means to extinguish. A common misconception of nirvana is that it is a place. Nirvana is believed to be a cycle of life and what Buddhists work towards.
The bell of mindfulness is to encourage us to know when to begin or end something. It acts like a bodhisattva, gently calling us back to awareness of the present moment. When the bell is rung 3 times, we stop whatever we are doing and relax and become aware of our breathing. Within the practice of using the bell of mindfulness, we refer to inviting the bell to sound rather than striking or sounding the bell. The small rod used to invite the bell is therefore known as the bell inviter, and the person inviting the bell is called the bellmaster. Upon hearing the sound of the bell, we stop what we are doing and concentrate on our breath. A favorite gatha of mine to use during this practice is, "The sound of the bell is the voice of the Buddha, calling me back to my true home, the present."